Hi there, everybody. My name is Adrian Beckingham. Welcome to my show, The Sword in the Stone. This is actually the very first episode brought to you as part of a brand new campaign. Sword in Stone has a social purpose, which is to use ancient wisdom tales alongside modern news and events to highlight and debate British traditions. What does it mean to be Indigenous in the UK, and how do we find a capable, trustworthy leader? There's some very big questions there, I feel. So, this is a channel where stories and traditions are important, mine and yours. With a particular interest in the UK, I'm a father and a grandfather born of these islands. My fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers, and their ancestors too were all born and raised here across England and Scotland. I have a great uncle who was awarded Britain's highest military prize, the Victoria Cross, for repeatedly crossing behind enemy lines and into Germany during the Second World War. One of my grandfathers spent his entire career pushing wheelbarrows of cement dust. Well, at least that's where he began his job at the tender age of 8, working for Blue Circle Cement and helping build the country until he finally retired, a man in his 70s. This was in Newcastle upon Tyne, the city of my birth. His only other job was to be allocated during the Second World War the role of being a community fireman, extinguishing fires from the German bombers. You can actually trace our family heritage back to the famous Scottish poet Robbie Burns, my grandfather John Renison Burns. My other grandfather, William Sidney Beckingham, was an electrician who helped to develop the little arm that is inside windscreen wipers on cars that allows the windscreen wiper to turn automatically. Previously, you used to have to use a little hand pump to get the windscreen wiper to go, go pump, pump, pump. That's my grandfather who helped to create something that is used as a very handy device that we don't even usually take for granted in everyday life for people all around the world. And that's one of the things about England. We've invented everything from penicillin, which has eradicated so many people dying from what are today avoidable deaths because of the penicillin. That's antibiotics, in case you didn't know. From penicillin to what else shall I mention? Oh, what are you using right now? The internet, also invented by English engineers. Fantastic. How many things have we brought to this world that we're using all the time? The list could go on and on and on and on and on. Things that you're using, dear viewer, all the time. Ever use windscreen wipers? I know you have. Ever use the internet? I know you are right now. Thank England for that. And that's one of the things I want to do on this channel is actually return some pride to what it is to be English, also to what it is to be Scottish, to what it is to be Welsh and from Northern Ireland, because recently there's been some sort of deep shame embedded in that. That's partly due to our history as well. But just as we were key players in the establishment of slave routes, we were also, England, key players in the abolishment of slavery. So we evolved to fight for freedom on other people's behalf and brought them their freedom in a very big way. So there's no reason to feel shame about that. That father of mine, that grandfather, I should say, of mine, William Sidney Beckingham, who helped to invent the little arm that makes windscreen wipers go. He also played a role in the Second World War. He helped to develop the bomb release systems on the aircraft that when Germany started bombing us and Germany was bombing all of Western Europe, of course, the English fought back, and my grandfather William Sidney Beckingham, he helped to ensure that the bomb release systems on the planes worked as effectively as possible. The factory where he worked was set up in a London West End theatre to conceal its military aim. It wasn't putting on plays anymore. It was helping develop bomb systems. However, you had actors turn up every single day, standing outside of the theatres, pretending to buy tickets and wait in queue to see the show. This was to avert the attention of German spies on the streets, so that the West End Theatre turned bomb factory, munitions factory would not itself get bombed by the Germans. So you see some real heritage there from my family bloodline of what it is to be indigenous to these islands. I would say that these days, my grandfather, John Renison Beckingham, leaving school and working full time in a cement factory at the age of 8 would obviously be illegal in England these days. So laws do adapt and change to look towards the careful um, well-being, if you like, physical and mental of our population. It's called being progressive, but not everything progressive is positive any longer. We can thank the woke community for bringing in a lot of progressive ideas that really step all over the human rights of often indigenous peoples all around the world. Many would argue that current laws, such as those protecting children from labour, are a positive sign of being progressive. And yes, I would agree with that, citing obvious examples such as women's rights. The current Starmer government, boo, yes, the current Starmer government would no doubt think itself very progressive. They're an example of progressive thinking that is tearing so many wonderful systems apart. What about free speech, for example? What about the right to vote, for example? What about the right of peaceful protest, for example? Alarmingly, these are all currently under threat. In my view, not everything about the so-called progressive movement is positive. Look around us in our own backyard and indeed to our neighbours across the sea in continental Europe. Let's take Sweden as a prime example. Sweden went from being the most open-armed of our European neighbours, with borders and homes open wide to a flood of immigrants. When I say homes, it was actually the norm, as it had been promoted by the government for Swedish natives to open up their homes to refugees. So refugees living under their roofs behind their own closed doors. Now that was an idea that was groundbreaking from the point of view of assimilation. I myself, dear viewer, have a refugee, a genuine asylum approved and vetted refugee from Iran, a man who was working doing calligraphy in Iran, and some of his calligraphy was considered uh, political and opposing the regime that has now just killed thousands and thousands of Iranians last week. So some years ago, he had his house seized by the Iranian government, and he was told to flee the country, or he and his family would all be killed. So he came without his family. Only he was able to leave. He was assured they'd be safe if he left, so he did. So I've got an Iranian refugee living in my home. He's got a key to my front door, a refugee. Therefore, anybody who'd like to criticize me for being far right, who doesn't have a refugee living in their home, I better have a little bit of a rethink there. I'm a nightmare for woke people because they can throw all these accusations at us. Oh, you're far right. Oh, you're right wing. Oh, you're a racist. They got to look at my track record. I've done a lot more than have a refugee living inside my home. But I know that that is a lot more. That one thing of many things I do in my life is a lot more than most of these woke people criticizing us lot as right wing, where actually we're just being sensible and facing genuine, realistic issues. than they can possibly argue. Armchair activists, a lot of them are, never got a clue what's really going on. Anyway, back to Sweden. So Sweden was allowing refugees to come into people's homes as this great experiment in integration and assimilation. Instead, it turned out it wasn't anything of the kind. It created ghettos. It wasn't so much assimilation, integration as infestation. I'm sorry to say. Now, Sweden has got the highest rate of bombings going off in the streets of any country in the peacetime world. I say peacetime world, of course, there's war in many countries, but Sweden is a country currently at peace. Of all the countries currently at peace, i.e., without actual soldiers fighting in the streets of their homeland, Sweden has the highest number of bombs going off. They've also got probably the tightest borders. Them and Denmark have the tightest borders in the world to stop immigrants. And also, the Swedish government are paying thousands of pounds to any immigrant who's willing to leave. They get it put straight into their bank account. Thousands and thousands and thousands, I should say euros, just to leave. I forget the exact figure. I think it's 35,000 euros. 35,000 euros, maybe 25,000. How many Brits, put your hand up if you'd like £25,000 put into your account right now? Yes, please. Well, you can get it if you leave. Oh, except we actually live here in England. As I say, that's the situation that applies to Sweden, not England. But you take my point. There's a great enthusiasm amongst the Swedes, who were the most open-armed of all the assimilators, to now get their country back. The title Sword in Stone comes from King Arthur legends, the once and future king, as he's also known. One common cultural knowledge, one common story that is part of our cultural history, the legends of King Arthur. But while these stories were once well known, there are increasingly more and more people living in our country who not only wouldn't know those stories, wouldn't be able to relate to them, but also can't even speak English. There are third generation children whose grandparents emigrated into the United Kingdom, grandparents, and the grandchildren still can't speak English because they're not integrating, they're not assimilating. A great number of the people coming through our borders and onto our shores are now living in their own cultural ghettos. They have no interest at all in being in the United Kingdom culture. If you're not interested in being here, if you're critical of this way of life and you don't want to be part of it, then don't come here. It's pretty basic. The erosion that's taking place in our culture is part of what we aim to resist here on Sword in Stone. The method applied in this channel is to share, in my role as a master storyteller and winner of the Millennium Award for Storytelling, I plan to share an ancient myth or folk tale and explore what lessons it might hold for the blithering fools who currently play at a pantomime of supposedly running our country. So, each episode will share a traditional tale, and we will then look at one or more failings of our current leaders. We've got plenty to pick from, and we'll seek examples perhaps of better practice. My question to you is, will the true King Arthur please draw the sword from the stone? If you don't know what I'm talking about, drawing swords from stones, I'm about to tell you. It's time for the story then. And please remember to like and subscribe this channel if you'd like to hear more of these stories and you'd like other people to hear them as well. It will help spread the channel far and wide and keep you informed and updated if you both like and follow the channel. Why not do that now? I'll give you a pause to do so. Story time. So, This traditional legend of our land is set in the post-Roman era around 450 BC, possibly a little later. With Rome gone, a power vacuum had opened and small kingdoms appeared, led by a mixed assortment of self-made kings. Some of them were kind and fair, generous, and others were brutal, harsh, selfish, and greedy. Skirmishes flared as petty rulers defended holdings or seized new lands. Eventually, a king named Uther Pendragon united the tribes and he became High King, forging alliances that brought relative peace. But when many years later he died, another vacuum opened and rival kings again fought for supremacy. In those days, there lived a magician named Merlin, who is famed among nobles and kings. A traveller and storyteller versed in earth energies and divination, he was often sought for counsel. As conflicts worsened, Merlin fetched a sword crafted by the Lady of the Lake that had been imbued with high magic from Oberon, the king of the fairy kingdoms. Merlin thrust this magical sword named Excalibur into a large stone boulder. It sank in like a knife entering soft butter. Merlin then summoned the kings and declared only the rightful High King could draw the sword from the stone. Many mighty men tried, all failed. News spread. More kings and warlords gathered and tried their luck at withdrawing the sword from the stone. All failed. Then came Arthur, a humble page boy who was tending his master's horse, his master being Sir Kai, who was actually his half-brother. Arthur's attempt to draw the sword from the stone was invited as a joke, yet when he grasped the hilt, the blade slid straight free. All the assembled crowd gasped in shock. Only Merlin knew that Arthur was actually Uther Pendragon's true son. That's another story for another time. As the startled Arthur held the sword high, Merlin instructed, "This boy Arthur has claimed Excalibur. Only he could withdraw the blade from the stone. All hail Arthur, High King of Britain." "Hail Arthur, High King of Britain," called the assembled crowd of warlords and kings. All the kings and warlords then knelt. Arthur was High King, though young, and had much to learn. He did grow into a wise Christian king who ruled with compassion, with generosity, he ruled with wisdom, he ruled with quiet strength. He did make many errors, but he tended to recognize them, apologized, and improved, which strengthened both his own kingship but also the realm for all the people living there. Ordinary folk could anticipate fair treatment if ever there was a dispute to be settled, because the rulers would give them fair audience and wise counsel. During Arthur's reign, he had many personal woes, yet always did put his people first. In their farms, in their villages, in the towns and cities, the people enjoyed safe streets, fair wages for a fair day's work, low taxes, honesty amongst the gentry, leisure time, and plenty of merriment. How does that sound? How does that contrast to Britain today? How does that form of leadership, of honesty, and of owning up to your mistakes, learning by them, turning mistakes into lessons so that you can improve? How does that sound compared to our current elected leaders, elected and unelected, who wade through a stew of poor policy, chaotic U-turns, shallow excuses, and outright lies? By the date I'm actually going to be broadcasting this episode, the first episode indeed of Sword in Stone, it's now January 25, 2026. Starmer's Labour government has already created a long line of U-turns. So I've lost track. Are we up to about 15 now? And although creating a U-turn shows that the government has listened, actually under unyielding public pressure and also strong parliamentary debate and argument, the sorts of ideas that Starmer and his bunch of cronies were going to impose upon our country, ideas that were not in their electoral mandate and therefore the people never voted for, is a disastrous list of proposals that has to make everybody not only wonder, but wonder to the point of certainty, are these guys suit to rule our country, with a definitive no being the answer. I see nothing wrong with U-turns. It does show that our leaders are listening. It is important for leaders to listen, but when it's 15 U-turns and counting, that suggests a government that is feather floating in the wind rather than having some idea of direction to actually take the country in. It's a sort of crazy, disastrous proposals that are going to, with all certainty, blow us straight over those white cliffs of Dover to our very own doom, unless these proposals are blocked, which, well done, people, everybody who's signing those petitions. The two biggest petitions in British parliamentary history have both been served to Starmer's government this year. Indeed, this month, January 2026. Well done, everybody taking part in those. The demonstrations, tens of thousands of people on the street, and everything else that everyone's doing. Well done. Because right now we need to be uh, pushing our politicians back against everything they're proposing, it seems, so that the country we love and that we grew up in, the place where we were born and where many of us will die, we're able to recognize it in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now as the place that we know as Great Britain, rather than some strange quagmire marsh of uncertainty and unrecognized religious dogma and draconian laws. The proposals that are being pushed through by the government, they read to me like a blend of Monty Python and a Stephen King novel. Let's have a look at some of those, shall we? At some of these proposals Starmer thought was a great idea, wanted to actually bring through, none of which were mentioned in his electoral platform of his promise to voters, and which he wanted to impose upon us without any sort of public inquiry into how voters might feel. And you'll see why I say it's an absolutely diabolical list of draconian measures. Thank God for those 15 U-turns and counting. All thanks to you people, so keep the pressure up. But let's explore some very clear indicators of a government who's really lost their way. Using the excuse, here's number one, using the excuse they wanted to help curb illegal workers, and that's laughable. We're the last country in Europe with totally open borders. Hey, hey! And all we have for border control is rhetoric and broken promises. We'll do this, we'll do that. The one in, one out scheme. One in, one out, like what, are we under some sort of obligation to actually take illegals into our country? And there's tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of illegal refugees coming in any given year in recent years. And we don't want to do a one in, one out policy, really. Anyway, that's not mainly what I'm talking about here. Using the excuse they wanted to help curb illegal workers, Starmer wanted to hand the state a master key to every citizen's private life. That's digital ID, risking hackers and risking an ever-tightening state control and a permanent dragnet that would reach from holistic healthcare to travel and all sorts of basic civil rights. Labour's U-turn on the introduction of digital IDs came only after the second biggest petition in British history. My name was on there, was yours? This second biggest petition in British history was signed by well over 1 million people asking for digital ID scheme to be dropped. My signature was there, was yours? Before the U-turn, the government sent every signee an email initially ignoring the plea and stating, "We will introduce a digital ID within this parliament." That was their reply to the petition in the first instance. And then they went on to cite, and I quote, Estonia system reportedly saves every citizen hours every month by streamlining unnecessary bureaucracy. End quote. Estonia? Have you ever heard the United Kingdom government quote Estonia in anything before? I don't mean to begrudge the people of Estonia. I know they've had a very rocky parliamentary history from aristocracy led almost dictatorships to communism to revolution to uncertain forms of democracy, and now they've got this digital ID, and apparently it's saving people a bit of paperwork every month. And Starmer's government's go, "Yay, look at Estonia, it really works." That's their answer to the largest petition at the time. It was only this year, this month, January 2026. That was their reply to receiving the largest petition ever, except now bigger ones come in. How deep and far did Starmer need to scoop to find a country that had opted for digital ID route without becoming either entirely communist or a total dictatorship? Dictatorships and communism are both systems which history shows have failed. I, by the way, travelled to the Berlin Wall before the Berlin Wall came down. I spent some time exploring uh, Russian-controlled Eastern Europe. Have you ever done that? If you haven't, and you're trying to criticize me, go and learn some history. Better than learn some history, immerse yourself in the real life experience. Oh, you missed out, did you? Best you can do is read a few books. Well, try doing that and listen to the eyewitnesses. That would be me. And part of what I did when I was in the area was when the Berlin Wall did come down. I went back there. I was one of the people helping. It was it was called being custodian to a chaperone. Sorry, it was called. I was a chaperone that would bring people from Eastern Europe through into Western Europe. You had to stay with them each individually for a full 36 hours to make sure they weren't like lost sheep in a wolf pen. I've not got a very good track record for a far right activist, have I? No. You woke people are gonna really bang your heads hard against me. It's water off a duck's back, mate. It really is. Anyway, I was saying that both communism and dictatorships have seriously failed, and so why would we be going for digital ID? Just look at Iran. There's another example. Yeah, democracy is really failing as well, isn't it? It is bringing up the wrong leaders. Totally inept people are ruling not just our democratic country, but many democratic countries. Most of the European continent, I would put into that basket. Totally inept, corrupt, misguided, and cowardly leaders. Hmm. It's a sad state of affairs. It's the people, however, who are not cowardly, who are not misguided, and who are educated of the realities of the time, who are making the difference, just like all those Iranian protesters, thousands of whom were shot dead by the state soldiers and police. There they were protesting for freedom, so they wouldn't have to live underneath this uh, religious dictatorship anymore. Go, people, go. Go, people, go. Go, people, go. Go, people, go. And yet, when just last week, people here in London gathered to protest outside the Iranian embassy to show support for the people being mowed down by gunfire in Iran itself, our police made the most heavy-handed response anyone's seen in years, probably since the Battle of the Beanfield. If you don't know anything about the Battle of the Beanfield, look it up, where police went in, where travellers were living in fields in their vans, where families were, and they used their truncheons to beat up men, women, and children. In the days when people didn't have mobile phones yet, but a few people had cameras and they recorded the police brutality. Well, that was back then. That was decades ago now. I've not seen brutality by the police personally on the streets since last week. That was to that level, and that was against people protesting outside the Iranian embassy in support of the people calling for democracy in their country and being mowed down by gunfire. Well, from something so serious as that to something much more colloquial. Starmer's attack on pubs. What would Britain be without the local boozer? That's my question. At the local boozer, that's where communities thrive and loneliness finds companionship. Had Starmer had his way, pubs would be closing quicker than you can ring a bell and say, last orders. Like pubs, the proposed farm tax rises that would have pushed family farms into bankruptcy. Supporting the people who feed our nation should be a priority. Supporting venues like pubs that uh, turn loneliness into companionship, that should be a priority, as should ensuring accurate choice regarding health and ethical concerns around food coming to our dinner plates. I want to know why so many major supermarket chains have started selling halal meat without labeling it. Halal meat, where the animal is not properly stunned before they're slaughtered, so they can be in terrible fear. They're being killed slowly. All that adrenaline is going into their bodies. You people are eating the meat from the animal that was killed in such a way that it wasn't stunned and knocked out and then slaughtered. It was fairly peaceful, at least. The animal was not in a state of shock and fear as it was dying. It just was knocked out and then it was killed. Some would say that's terrible, but at least the animal is not in fear. At least the adrenaline from the animal is not pumping through its system. At least you are not eating that meat that was frozen with fear as it died. And yet, halal meat from the Muslim community, from Muslim butchers, they often choose the halal meat. It's entering your supermarkets without being labeled. Also, the corner stores too. I mean, are these stories even true? Are we all being led down the garden path? It's a long and winding trail, a long and winding trail. What about ending the winter fuel allowance for our pensioners, hey? So the elderly people would freeze to death through the winter. It's currently January, winter in England. Wouldn't that have been fantastic? Not. Everything I've mentioned so far, the government has done a U-turn on, by the way, in case you weren't aware. How about expanding the current cap on two families to receive support for their children from the government, like child benefit? British taxpayers currently pay for up to two children per family. The third child, fourth child, fifth child, 10th child don't receive any government support into the parents' bank accounts to support that child. So the first two children do, and after that, no. That's the current situation. Starmer's saying, "Oh, let's lift that cap. People can have as many kids as they want. You will pay for all of it. If you go and work, you pay your taxes, you can support people to have great big families, lots of kids. You'll pay for the kids. Isn't that fantastic?" Those poor little kiddies can't pay for themselves, can they? After all, the kids can't pay for themselves. It's not their fault they were born into a family of 10 people. But the point is that modern white British households average under 2 children per family. They're obviously feeling the pinch financially and don't want to have the expense of more than 2 children. And they're doing the right thing. They're going out to work. They're paying their taxes. They're bringing up their, on average, less than 2 children. Why should they now be expected to fork out for the non-white, non-tax paying communities to have as many kids as they want? And us lot, the indigenous people of Britain, will pay for their children. Terrible idea. It's been a U-turn. It's been stopped under public and parliamentary pressure. But I ask you, what ideology, what insane mindset ever placed that on the table? Came from the Starmer government. Where is Starmer? Stammering Starmer with his U-turns. Stammering Starmer. Where is he being leaned on from? I think some of you know the answer. You can make an educated guess and probably get it right. Not even on this list of officially recognized U-turns is the vitally urgent issue of open borders. In his election campaign, Starmer, like the equally guilty Conservatives, promised to secure our borders, something the British people have been asking for generations. Of very particular concern are the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of unvetted young men who are being allowed into our country. When these people say, oh, we're refugees, we're from a war-torn country, or we're from a cruel country where, you know, we're in some way under threat, or they're legal, they're political, their religious system is dangerous. We're fleeing to save our lives. Why are they all young men? Where are the women? Where are the children? I would say let's let the women and children in first. Isn't that the right thing to do? Isn't that the British thing to do? If there's a large boat going down, like say the Titanic went down, didn't it? We all know that story, or most of us do. And maybe unless you're from Iran or Afghanistan, you never heard of it. That's how unattached they are to our history. I don't mean all of them, but many of them, especially those guys throwing their passports overboard so they don't have any ID, so they can say, "Oh, I'm from Eritrea." You know why I'm from Eritrea, which I'm not really, but I know that everyone who says they're from Eritrea, they've got a 99.9% chance of being let in. So I'm from Eritrea. Yeah, I really, really am. And my name is Muhammad, even though that's not my name at all, but I've thrown my passport away. You don't know who I am. And I know you'll write down on a bit of paper whatever I tell you, and that becomes my new identity. And then, no matter what crimes I might have committed in my own country, or the very fact of throwing my passport away shows ill intent and deceit, a lack of honesty, you're going to let me in and pay for my lifestyle. Absolutely crazy. Statistics show that these individuals from places like Afghanistan and Iran. Remember, I've got an Iranian refugee. He's Christian. He's got a job. He pays taxes. He's a genuine refugee who, because of his work as a calligraphist, was had all his property seized from him by the state and was possibly going to be murdered or spend life in prison. That's a refugee. Do I welcome them in? Hey, I've got one in my own home. He's got a key to my front door, so he can let himself in when I'm not here. But letting in unvetted people who don't bother to bring their ID and are certainly not going to get themselves a job and are living off taxpayers is absolutely atrocious. And they're 22 times more likely, people from Afghanistan, for example, to commit crimes, everything from pickpocketing to rape. Yet tens of thousands have entered during Starmer's relatively short watch, and more arrive every single day. In the year 2023 to 24, the lowest figures I could find suggest the Home Office spent £4.7 billion on asylum support, of which £3 billion was on four-star asylum hotels. This is an average that the British taxpayer is funding of £8 million per day on hotels. Money that Britain badly needs. What for? What about potholes? What about building social housing? What about mental health care? What about resources for primary schools? What about libraries? What about strengthening our defence at a time when the world is changing, the political world is changing, and Europe, including the UK, have been found with our pants down when it comes to the strength of our military. We've been hollowed out, is the current term, in the most disgraceful way. We really do live in an ailing nation. Hence my request and my quest. Would the real King Arthur please show himself? Would King Arthur have simply emptied the nation's pockets over the white cliffs of Dover in the way our government is currently doing? Some of you might remember a promise by a previous Tory Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He promised to cut the backlog of illegal entrants coming in from the boats. Well, do you know how this was done? Staff at the assessment centres were instructed to simply stop vetting. No worries whether they've really come from the place they claim to have come from. No worries whether their name is really the name they're giving you. No worries what crimes they might have committed in their home countries or even here in the UK. Just stamp their application as approved. Let them in, that'll cut the backlog. Asylum applicants aren't even called applicants by the staff processing them. The staff processing the applicants were instructed, don't call them applicants anymore, call them customers. Customers? That just about says it all. A customer is someone who pays you for a good or a service. These guys are not customers. These guys, they are guys. They're not women. They're not children. They're guys. These guys aren't customers. They're not paying for anything. Quite the opposite. The British taxpayer is the customer. These guys aren't paying for their service. Instead, they're being handed free mobile phones, free hotel rooms, free sneakers, free clothes, free jackets. The British taxpayer is paying. The British taxpayer is the customer. And it is the needs of the British taxpayer for a safe and fair society for ourselves and our families. They're the customers. It needs to be the British taxpayer and their human rights that should be the key factor in this equation. So why did the Home Office instruct their staff to call these illegal migrants coming off the boats with no passports, who give any name and any country of origin they want to, true or false? Why have the staff at the assessment centres been instructed by their Home Office superiors to call these men customers? The terminology is very deceptive, but it does tell a very clear story. I wish I were making this all up. I really wish I were making this all up. I really wish I were making this all up, but it's all documented facts. I qualified as a journalist from the Australian College of Journalism in the year 1991. That's before many of you viewing this were even born. I've been researching, investigating, and qualifying facts are really facts for over 40 years. And that's exactly what we need from anyone coming into our country. We need them to be researched. We need their facts to be documented. And if they throw their passports overboard while crossing the British Channel, then they are not allowed in. The British Channel, I say, is a beautiful defensive moat. It's the very same British Channel we defended from the German Navy in both world wars. And yet we can't stop these small boats coming across. Well, we can. There's just not the political will. And when I say small boats, I'm sorry, but some of those small boats are the same size of a large customer public ferry, because these guys in their small boats are ferried by ferries across the British Channel by British Border Force. I bet those guys at British Border Force hate their jobs. It has been said that car traffic control ticket inspectors have the least popular job in Britain. I suspect border control are getting pretty close to that point. You know, nobody voted for this amount of immigration. In fact, it's something that we voted against. And importantly, we really, really need to do correct checks on all these boat migrants who are genuinely fleeing danger or persecution. Those genuine migrants who are coming in who really are fleeing, they would prefer that we did checks, that we did vetting. Because if you really are fleeing danger or persecution in your country, then you do not want to be entering a country which in itself is becoming more and more unsafe, with higher crime rates, with rapes and murders becoming every day on our streets and broadcast in our news. If I was a genuine asylum seeker, I would like to go to a place where all the other people who are committing a crime by entering that country legally, and many of whom have no intention of ever working, have no intention of ever integrating, but actually want to create a battlefront against British culture. If I was a genuine asylum seeker, I would not want to be coming into a country that is plagued with protest, that is plagued with a two-tier system of justice. Without correct checks, without correct vetting of the people coming into this country, everyone loses, except the criminals and those looking for a free ride as a new lifestyle. With correct vetting, everyone wins, except those who wish us genuine harm. Where is our King Arthur, who listened to the people and ruled with a wise and reliable strength? Alongside these corrosive strategies, we've got so many disturbing examples of a ruling class who are in ethical meltdown. Let's consider for a moment the ex. Thank praise the Lord that he's now an ex, and there is a religious pressure going on in this particular story. I say praise the Lord. Consider West Midlands ex-Chief Constable Craig Guildford. After Muslim activists threatened violence if Israelis attended a football match, police didn't pressure the group making the threats. The Muslim thugs who are saying, we're going to cause violence if you let the Israelis come and cheer on their team. No, instead, under the direction of ex-West Midlands Chief Constable Craig Guildford, the police force, sent a false claim to the government that Israeli fans were making threats and were going to be the aggressors. So the Israeli fans were banned from going to the game. It's a bit like the upcoming planned protest where they want to march for Jesus in a great big procession through the streets of Whitechapel. But because there have been threats of massive violence by Muslim people living in the area, Christian parade have been told by the police you can't go. We are a Church of England country, Church of England, living in England. People don't want to assimilate. People don't want to integrate. Go back to the country that you love so much. It's as easy as that. I speak as someone who has traveled to very many different countries. I speak of someone who, this time last year, I spent 7 weeks living in a mud hut. I didn't pay to be there. I was a guest. I was a guest of a Maasai king who's a goat herder. And I lived for 7 weeks in a hut that had enough electricity to very slowly charge up a single mobile phone. It had no running water, had no other electricity, it had no internet, and for 7 weeks I didn't see anyone who wasn't an indigenous Maasai. Now, did I go there and impose my will, impose my way of life, impose my philosophy upon them? No. I was born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, just like you, just like all the people who are trying to not assimilate, but to push their own way upon the host nation. Being born with 2 ears and 1 mouth should mean that we're better at listening than we are at speaking. We're better at receiving than we are at enforcing. And certainly when you're a guest invited into a country or a guest uninvited who's accepted through kindness and courtesy and a sense of humanity into a country, and do not seek to impose your will. Do not seek to change that country's culture to the culture of the place that you have just fled. Do not seek to put social pressures on that host community by stealing from its shops, by terrifying its residents, by molesting its women and children. There should be a one strike and you're out policy for those who are allowed in. If they commit any type of crime or misdemeanor, they are sent back. Why is it so difficult to understand for some people? Absolutely crazy. So back to X. I love saying X. Ex-West Midlands Chief Constable Craig Guilford, who made the false claim about Israelis threatening violence to stop the Israelis coming to the soccer match, so that the actual aggressors, the Muslim community, could be happy that they'd won. Well, that is giving in to a form of terrorism. The official definition of terrorism is something along the lines of an individual or a group who use threats of violence or actual violence to get their way against another group. Well, that is what happened in the case of the Israelis, who were banned from the football match, and the West Midlands police, they did indeed bow under the pressure of that terrorism. What is going on in this country? It also transpired that ex-West Midlands Chief Constable Craig Guilford had the leader of a local mosque in on the panel of people who decided whether he got that job in the first place. Well, I wouldn't mind the leader of a mosque being on the panel to decide who is the leader of the police force in the area, as long as there's also the leader of, say, a Buddhist temple, the leader of a Hindu community, the leader. Do you get my point? School teachers, were they on the list? Librarians, people in the museum service. That might be the case. But it does really stink of corruption. It bleats corruption, brr, like sheep. What's happened to British values? So he's out of his job now, but he didn't have the decency when found out to just resign. No, no. And the Home Secretary didn't have the guts to fire him. No, no. Or had to be put underneath sort of public inquiry. Let's spend some more taxpayers' money on a government inquiry to find out if this was unjust, and it was found out that it was unjust, then he was forced to step down. Thanks for spending that extra little bit of English taxpayers' money, you guys. Why can't you just be ethical and accept what's right and what's wrong? Then there's former Deputy PM Angela Rayner, who stepped down as Housing Minister after failing to pay sufficient stamp duty on her property she owned in Hove. But of course, that was only after public money was burned on an ethics inquiry that found that she wasn't willing to follow the rules that she herself applied upon the rest of the population. She's okay though, chap, because despite stepping down as housing minister, she's still an MP and she's enjoying a salary of £93,904. She's the very same lady who said while she was still in opposition that being an MP isn't a second job and we're going to stop this corruption of MPs having second jobs. But oh, she's got a second job now. She's an MP, hasn't she? She's just taken it on in the last couple of weeks. She's going to be a paid speaker on top of her job as an MP with her over 90 grand a year. It's like the old George Orwell novel, Animal Farm. Some animals are more equal than others. The quote actually goes, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And the animals at the top in the George Orwell novel Animal Farm are pigs. Well, I wouldn't say politicians are like pigs. Pigs don't deserve the insult. Presiding over this atrocious mess sits Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the least popular Prime Minister in British history. You know, I mentioned two biggest petitions in British parliamentary history, both coming in this year, January 2026. Well, one of them was against the digital ID. The other was calling for the government to hold a snap election. Again, my signature was there. Was yours? We need to use people power collectively versus a leader who instructs police to harass and arrest indigenous people for posting comments on X and Facebook on social media, expressing their concerns at the state of the country. You'll get a knock on the door from some clobber in a police hat. And suddenly it's okay to go and shoplift as long as what you actually want to shoplift is worth under £200 as a single haul, then the police will not arrest you. What's that going to do for the rest of us who do pay for our shopping? Maybe we should all start shoplifting as well. What do you think? Have a shoplifting protest. Make sure it's under 200 quid because you know who the main shoplifters are. Ah, the people coming in off the boats, of course. So everybody else's prices get pushed up. I was in my local shop yesterday and there were things like, uh, small cardboard containers of salmon or things like steak or fish. They're all now in these great big plastic locking tubs that have security panels on them that they have to open up before you leave the store. A slice of salmon. Because so many of them are being stolen. Do you know who gets to pay for that extra security of every single piece of meat being wrapped up in a lockable plastic safe with a scanner attached? Who do you think pays for that? Of course, we do, the consumers, the people who are doing the so-called right thing. Just remember, we as a people indigenous to this land, we've got nowhere else to go. This is our home. Unless we opt to join the many Brits escaping these lands, going to other shores, taking their talent and their money with them. Those of us who remain here are faced with higher taxes, rising shop prices, spiraling housing prices, all creaking under a system whereby two-tier Keir Starmer, stammering Starmer, one rule for anybody from England and Scotland and Ireland and Wales as indigenous, and much more carefree set of rules for anybody who's entered this country recently. Good old two-tier Keir Starmer, who sanctions and preferences new coming migrants over the people whose ancestors' bones lay under this very soil. I ask again, Where is King Arthur? It's absolutely no wonder they're very, very sad that the British are starting to lose their famous sense of humour. We haven't lost our sense of humour, but it's certainly being sorely tried. At least those who dare commit a traditionally British style joke are likely to whisper it quite quietly or share it with punters in some underground basement in case they're going to be arrested because a joke's offensive to someone who's forgotten the medicine inherent in laughing at our own quirks and idiosyncrasies. What else have we had this past week? Oh, Starmer stepping in to deploy forces in Greenland and the Ukraine. Apparently, he's sending one soldier to Greenland. The UK, under Starmer's direction, is sending a single member of personnel from the British Armed Forces to Greenland. Now, that's really going to scare off the Russians and the Chinese, isn't it? If they were to take an interest in the place, it's just a laugh. So in Ukraine, Starmer wanted to tout what he called the coalition of the willing, the idea being to gather all NATO countries together and send some ground troops over to the Ukraine to sort of help ensure any peace settlement. That Trump, who's ended 8 wars, and like he said, he thought the Ukraine one would be the easiest, but it's proving to be the hardest. He's not been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, so no other leader in the history of politics in any country has ended 8 wars. There are things that Trump's doing very wrong, but there are things that Trump's doing that's very right, and ending 8 wars is one of them. Anybody who doesn't recognize that has got their head stuck in the sand, or is so blinded by the trees of their own bias that they can't see the wider landscape. So there's Starmer going on about the coalition of the willing. All these NATO countries standing in, putting ground troops on the soil in the Ukraine. However, in reality, nobody wants anything to do with it except for good old France. Lest we forget, France. They surrendered just 42 days after German forces entered their territory in World War II. 42 days France lasted before capitulating in a war that lasted 2,191 days. Us Brits never surrendered. We fought on until the win was ours, shared with our friends in the United States. I think the continental Europeans have forgotten who gave them their liberty from Nazi rule as they strive to control us from the EU. If it wasn't for Britain, these EU leaders would have probably spent their lives in a goat shed, in chains, as slaves, instead of corrupt bureaucrats cruising around in limousines and eating caviar and making dictator-style laws for the populations of Europe. Just you remember your history, guys, and show a bit of respect. Well, so history would suggest that the one country willing to stand by us with boots on the ground in Ukraine, that being the French, doesn't got a really strong military background, has it? As street cred. They lasted 42 days before surrendering to the Nazis in a war that lasted 2,191 days. That's who Starmer wants to go in there with. It's a very sobering fact, by the way, that we now have fewer troops than we used to defeat Napoleon. There's another battle that the French lost. They're good at losing battles, aren't they? And Starmer proposes that we stand with the French alone against Russia and China to give security to Ukraine. It would be laughable if it wasn't such terribly poor judgment. At the same time, Starmer's happy to stand there and make a public broadcast, stood before two enormous Union Jacks, British flags, and he speaks about the democratic right for the people of Greenland to be able to have self-determination, and Trump mustn't come in to Greenland. At the very same time, though, there's Starmer. There's two pieces of total hypocrisy going on at that moment. One is that he's fighting for the autonomy of the indigenous people of Greenland to have some say in who their masters are. But at the very same time, he's been battling to sign the Chagos Islands over to Mauritius, which is a country very much under the thumb of the Chinese government. And the Chagosians who live in the Chagos Islands have made it very, very clear they'd much rather have Britain as their masters than China. But Starmer, when it was suggested that there should be some sort of poll of the Chagosians to see what did they want to have happen, the Chagosians were already making it very clear they'd want to stay with Britain. Starmer said, "Oh no, there's no time, and that would not hold any legal standing," said Starmer. So we won't listen to the indigenous Chagosians. Oh, but we've got to listen to the indigenous people of Greenland. It's just such hypocrisy. The second piece of hypocrisy in that statement Starmer made just last week that was televised, he stood in front of two large Union Jacks. Well, that's fair enough, isn't it? That's the flag of the country he's Prime Minister of. Oh, except for the fact that for months now, if ordinary Brits try and put up the Union Jack or the flag of St. George anywhere in their communities, councils and police come and pull them down saying, oh, that's right wing. Your flag's a right wing representation. Oh, but now the same Prime Minister who ordered for the flags to get pulled down all across the country is stood there in front of them. Did this guy actually get his brain out of a cornflakes packet? That's a serious question, by the way, not rhetorical. Maybe it should be rhetorical because the answer is obvious. Yes, he did. Maybe he's had a lobotomy and that's why he's not worried about what's going on in his own country. It's laughably poor judgment. Laughably poor judgment. Here's another very sobering fact that more immigrants have entered our shores to live in the United Kingdom since the 1990s, so in the last 25 years, last 30 years, to the number who entered between when the Anglo-Saxons ruled England up to Churchill. And we've got an armed forces smaller than the one that we defeated Napoleon with. Politics sometimes can be very boring. Right now, I find it quite fascinating. And the reason why it's quite fascinating is actually quite scary. If you don't get involved and do something about it, people like me, people like you, then this country is going to end up unrecognizable. But here's the theme I'm about to talk about now. Historical theme, if you like, the Magna Carta, trial by jury. Ever heard of that? Starmer wants to end trial by jury. Dropping trial by jury is a proposal that would plunge this country back 900 years since the idea of a jury evolved in England in the 12th century under King Henry II, who lived between 1154 and 1189. Starmer wants to go back nearly 900 years. In that case, that almost, not quite, almost takes it to the period of Merlin and King Arthur. They could be our contemporaries then, couldn't they, if we dropped trial by jury? Maybe we should get Merlin on the blower and say, Merlin, come and pop a big stone out the front of the Houses of Parliament, would you? Slap Excalibur the sword hilt deep inside of the stone and see who the worthy king is. Get him to try and pull that Excalibur out of the stone, would you, Merlin, in front of Parliament House, right there by Big Ben. Starmer stammering Starmer can be first in line. That makes me laugh for the first time in this broadcast, thinking of Keir Starmer trying to pull Excalibur out of the stone in front of Merlin. Good luck, mate. Actually, you're going to need more than bloody luck to help you on that one, fella. You are toast.